I want to conclude this mini lecture on the scientific revolution by calling your attention to several other key figures in the emerging understanding of cosmology, or the view of the heavens, that followed from Nicholas Copernicus's understanding of the heliocentric universe. One was a man named Tycho Brahe. He was born 3 years after Copernicus's death. He was a Danish astronomer who was a brilliant 20-year-old math student when he was given, as a mark of his promise as a scholar or as a scientist, he was given full reign over an island, a 2,000-acre island by the King of Denmark, an island that Brahe called Johannesburg, or Heavenly Castle, and there for the rest of his life he set up an enormously elaborate observatory in which he basically recorded every night the movement of the stars and made an elaborate map of the heavens, but for 40 years basically took exceedingly detailed notes and measurements of the stars as they moved across the sky. By 1602 he had cataloged 777 stars. He was sure that there were 223 more because he knew there had to be 1,000. He had arrived at that figure somehow in his calculations. It needed to be a perfect number. You get a sense here still of the medieval ways of thinking, but Brahe's gift was primarily that of a record keeper. It was Johannes Kepler who came along half generation after Brahe, who took his data and tried to make sense of Brahe's data, first by explaining the movement of planets, which he noticed moved in an elliptical form rather than a perfectly spherical form around the Earth. Brahe already had determined that. Kepler, again in this medieval mode, was sure that the movement of the planets needed to correspond to the perfect three-dimensional spaces taken up by these forms. So first a pyramid, and then a cube, and then a polytetrahedron. I think that's the name of this multi-sided figure, in which each planet corresponded. Well, of course, that was a wild goose chase, but by the end of his life, Kepler had figured out, basically by inventing calculus, some understandings of planetary motion that enabled him to describe with great accuracy the movement of the planets and to calculate with great precision when the next eclipse would come, or how planets would move through the sky. Galileo is a name you probably have heard of. Was a pioneering scientist in many regards. He invented a telescope that was the first that enabled close inspection of the moon, in which he noticed for the first time irregularities. Here again you can stop the lecture long enough to read these texts in which Galileo says, especially in the bottom one, that we should trust our senses. We should let go of just repeating formulas from the past. Trust your senses, and when you do that, suddenly the universe becomes both more understandable but also much more complicated. It was Isaac Newton, the fourth in this sequence of scientists, who was the first to develop a mathematical model that pulled it all together. Whether or not Newton was actually hit on the head by a falling apple under a tree, we don't know, but he did develop the basic mathematical principles of the laws of gravity, and it was Newton's understandings of planetary motion, of motion itself, gravitational influence on objects, that set the basic principles for a scientific worldview. It was Newton's contemporary, a man named Alexander Pope, who described Newton's work with this couplet that says a lot about a shifting understanding of authority. Nature and nature's law lay hid from sight. God said, "Let Newton be," and all was light.